if I told you that hypnotherapy is being studied as a powerful tool for pain management in children, sleep, and even IBS, and that the science is even more robust than ever before? So, one of the reasons I'm excited about this conversation today is because I have 13 years of experience as a hypnotherapist. I've personally conducted thousands of sessions myself, and our Grace Hypnotherapy team has conducted over 30,000 sessions globally. So we have more anecdotal evidence as to the power of hypnotherapy than potentially any other source. And yet, there is so much scientific research out there that is showing the efficacy of hypnotherapy in a myriad of really exciting frontiers. But I'm not a researcher. And so I also need an interpreter to understand these studies. And I feel like because we have the platform we do, we have an opportunity and even a responsibility to take what's happening in the science realm, make it digestible, understandable, and bring it to everybody who has sought us out as a company or me out as a hypnotherapist to really, truly understand what's possible with hypnotherapy, and not just anecdotally and not just through incredible case studies and testimonials, which we've always done, but with true hard science. And so that is one of the reasons I'm thrilled to have Dr. Pinar here, who we have a phenomenal relationship with. You all have already just heard her bio, and she's just not only incredibly intelligent and has helped me learn so much about the process of research and how these studies are conducted, but really digesting and understanding, okay, great, that's a fantastic first initial finding, but there were these confounds here, or this is how it could be better in the future, and really looking at the process of hypnotherapy research as something that is ongoing and that will continue to improve over time. So thank you for being here, Dr. Pinar.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
And before we dive into the actual studies that we'll discuss today, you have a personal connection to hypnotherapy that I just think is so neat, because when we were looking for someone to help us put together our first ever compilation research doc, we were so impressed by your credentials and your experience, but then you have this personal connection to it. Would you like to share what that is?
Yes, I'd be so happy to. And that's really why I'm so happy we were able to connect, because this has been a really interesting journey for me as well to go into the research of hypnosis, because I already know about the power of hypnosis through my mother. She's a certified counselor and hypnotherapist, and I just know that hypnosis is really effective and across a broad range of subjects from there. And then personally, I'm a researcher, I'm a scientist, and the research that I've done has been in the biology and genetics sphere, and I know about how to conduct studies, how to interpret studies, sort of the structure that goes on in scientific research. And yet, it never occurred to me before to look at hypnotherapy and the research that's been done on it. So connecting with you, Grace, has been just so exciting for me, because I already know about the power of hypnosis and I know about the world of research. And this really allowed me to see what research has been done in hypnotherapy, where it's been done, the different subjects, the different techniques, and then sort of the effects and outcomes and the statistics behind those outcomes too. So it's been really exciting for me to get to sort of connect my two worlds that way.
Oh, it's so exciting. We're the perfect fit for one another. And I just think it's really time that all of these amazing findings leave to what, to me, it feels like they're hidden away in PubMed, they're siloed away in this scientific realm. And it's time for everyone to know this exciting research and what's been happening for years and years. So I'm going to share my screen for anyone who is watching the video version of this so that you can see this incredible research doc that we are so very proud of that we put together. And the very first volume came out late last year. So Hypnosis Research and Studies, Volume 1. And you can see here, looking at the table of contents, that we cover so much in this document, from blood pressure, hypnotherapy for helping folks who've just been through chemotherapy for cancer, cognitive performance, gut and urinary conditions, mental health, pain, reproductive health, sleep, smoking cessation, sports and music performance, weight loss, and more. And before we get to how the certain studies that we included were chosen, because Dr. Pinar was really instrumental in helping us choose which ones made the cut and which ones didn't, I'll also just scroll down so you can see our scientific and medical advisory board. So it's very important to me as we continue to make hypnotherapy mainstream and more widely understood that there are folks from all types of disciplines who are able to read these studies and say, yes, this is significant, this is important, and I put my stamp of approval behind this research document. And so we have emergency room physicians on our board. We have nurses, we have psychologists, we have brilliant psychiatrists, we have cardiologists, we have folks who are experts in acupuncture and integrative medicine, other hypnotherapists, and even brilliant occupational therapists. So definitely, if this interests you, I would take a moment to read through the 13 biographies we have of our brilliant scientific and medical review board. Okay, so with that in mind, Pinar, how did you help us choose? Because basically what we set out to do is say, we want to look at all the most recent research. We want to look at the research that really holds up under scrutiny. And we want to put this document together, this compilation that shows that hypnotherapy is effective in so many areas. And so you had to look at things that were old and new and just across such a wide breadth of topics. What criteria did you use to help us narrow it down and what could go into this document?
What's really interesting about just research in general and the factors that go into it are no matter really what the subject may be, doesn't even have to necessarily be science. There are these factors that really say this is research, this is how we can communicate our findings. And I hadn't really looked at hypnotherapy research before, so what I just did was look at the most cited studies that come up. So when a study is published, of course people read it, and other researchers might read it, and they might reference that study in their own research. And whenever that sort of connection is made between studies, that's called a citation. And you can see that when you go into a study where other studies have used that study, used that research. So that just gave me a broad overview of, what are some of the best known studies in hypnosis. But that was just to get my sort of grounding in the field, because it was the first time I was really looking at it through a research lens. And then I did what I would do for any sort of literature review. So literature review is a type of study in itself where you think about specific keywords and subjects that you want to research. And then you go through and you look that up in research databases. So the database we use is what you mentioned, Grace, PubMed. And I use this database because it's free to access. So I'm really about research being both understandable to the public, but before that, we need to make it accessible to the public. A lot of research is behind a paywall, but there is something called open access research, which means that when you go to that study, you're able to read the paper for free, essentially. Now, not all of the studies in this document themselves are open access, but I wanted to make sure that if somebody else wanted to look more into hypnotherapy about gut health or hypnotherapy for sleep, they would be able to use the same methods that I used to look it up so that they could find the latest research. So for 2025, for example. So that's why I used PubMed, because it's free to access as a database. I will say when I looked up just hypnosis or hypnotherapy, there were over 16,000 results, PubMed.
Wow. Dating back how far?
Oh, dating back how far is a great question. Let me look it up, actually.
16,000. And I've said from the beginning of my career that the research out there is robust, but I really only kind of knew that theoretically. So to narrow it down from 16,000 to the most exciting top 50 was a much more challenging process, actually, than I expected. Challenging just in terms of time. I'll also share the impetus for this came from my friend, Jessica Ortner, who is of the tapping solution. So there's this modality called the emotional freedom technique, where you tap on various meridians in the body and it helps relieve stress. And their company, the Tapping Solution, is one of the leaders in the space. And she's always been a huge supporter of us and our work and vice versa. And she started telling us that they put together a science and research doc because, again, they were just kept sharing all the anecdotal, amazing information that they'd collected over the years, but they knew the research was out there. So they did the work to finally compile it, put together a board, and she recommended we do the same because now whenever they have an interview or whenever they're having a PR moment, they're able to lead with this really fantastic, hard evidence. And I said, okay, great. Thanks, Jessica. What a fantastic idea. Let's go and do it. I thought it would take us a month. It took at least a year to not only find you, which was so important to us that we had someone with your background and expertise to help us narrow it down, but also then, again, to make it accessible to the public, to translate jargon that would make it very difficult for lay folks like myself to understand the findings. But then to put together our board and then have, so the board is 13 people, you're one of them. So these 12 other really brilliant, very busy folks who then went line by line through everything that you had already curated and edited for them to ask questions, raise red flags, just add interesting input anecdotally that they'd found here or there so it could help us understand the piece better. That took a long time. So now our goal is to put out a volume every year. Some of the studies will certainly stay the same, but if new research comes out, that we make sure that every volume at least has some new additions that are exciting or a deeper understanding of ones that came out before.
And actually on that topic of the board and then the time it took to revise upon their comments, that's actually a really integral part of research itself, peer review. So peers in the field, other experts in the field, for a lot of these published articles in peer-reviewed journals, they will take a draft of that article, they will go through, put their comments, put their questions, and then the article that gets published in a peer-reviewed journal has gone through that sort of rigorous review. So it's not just one author or even a team of authors, but it's experts in the field who have gone through and sort of confirmed that research before it's published. So I actually really appreciate that this document itself went through the peer review process
a number of times. And everybody had such great, fascinating input. It really made us feel so confident to put this out into the world. So were you able to find an earliest date?
I was, and actually I think it's so great that you asked that question because I was quite surprised to see how far back the research does go. 1896, we have a publication called On the Definition of Hypnosis. It's also really interesting to look into the journal that these articles are published in. So the journal itself is the publication, and then it has these articles. It might present them on a quarterly basis, a monthly basis, but a journal itself will usually have a theme of research. And this journal is called the Atlanta Medical and Surgical Journal. This article was published back in 1896 in the Atlanta Medical and Surgical Journal to define hypnosis.
I'm so glad that you looked that up. In my first book, Close Your Eyes, Get Free, there's a little section on the history of hypnotherapy and that we have evidence of it being used in ancient Druid societies and ancient Egyptian societies. But then we have a lot of records showing that it was used quite prolifically during World War I when anesthesia supplies ran out. And so surgeries, amputations had to take place on the field. They would use hypnotherapy as the way of reducing pain for the surgeries. I love that you've gone back even further than that, and that it wasn't in, some occult journal. It was in a surgical medical journal. That's fascinating. Wow. I'm going to go back and read that one. So all of the studies that we included in this document are within the last 10 years, I believe. Okay, so I'm getting really excited for us to dive in and start talking about the particular studies, but I know you had a few more criteria you used to help us narrow it down. What were those?
Exactly. So another thing was having more recent research. That's not to say that older research is invalid or things that we should be ignoring. Older research can definitely be very important to consult as well. But we wanted to use studies that really were from this sort of current time. So I think they're all from 2010 and on. And that's why that's helpful too, because we're able to get studies that are going into the digital sphere and using really modern techniques to combine with how hypnosis is being delivered. So if you were looking at older research, you wouldn't necessarily be getting that. And then within the types of studies, the document itself, when you go through, each study is presented in the same format.
So you all remember from Dr. Pinar's biography that she loves animal rescue, as do I. And so she has got so many wonderful animals in her home. You might hear some of the doggies barking in the background. Know that the doggies are safe and fine. Okay, great. So now let's take a look at just this one example within our research document of how each one of the studies were structured.
So each of the studies share the same structure, starting off with a headline that sort of summarizes the key points of that paper. And then you can see the first author and the year that the study was published. So you can really tell how recent that paper was. Then it's followed by the summary of the paper itself. And these summaries have all been written specifically for this document. So we've gone into each of these papers and chosen sort of the key points to bring together for you to understand the findings of that research and how the research was also conducted. And then near the bottom, you'll see the reference. So you can go to that reference, and it's actually a clickable link. So it will take you to the paper itself. Some of them are unfortunately not open access. So they might have a paywall, but a lot of the time you can consult your local library to get access to papers as well. And even if they are behind a paywall, the abstract of the paper will be available to view. And then at the very bottom there are some tags. So these tags can be helpful for you to search throughout the document to see research within similar categories. So in this particular study, we've tagged it as randomized controlled trial, migraine, and hypnosis as a standalone treatment. So that last tag, hypnosis as a standalone treatment, is letting you know that this study was looking at the efficacy of using hypnosis on its own as a treatment for whatever was the particular condition. For this study, it was migraines. We also have another tag called hypnosis as a complementary treatment. So in those studies, hypnosis is combined with a different type of treatment, maybe cognitive behavioral therapy, maybe a drug, any other sort of treatment, and hypnosis and that treatment in combination are then compared to maybe that other standard treatment just on its own. So that can help you see if hypnosis was used on its own or in combination with another treatment. And then the type of study that this is, we do have some studies that are meta-analyses. So that means a lot of different studies were combined so that their results and their data could be combined and shared. This one is called a randomized controlled trial. This is considered actually one of the sort of gold standard of research. And basically what it is The participants in the study are split into groups. Let's say 2 groups. One group receives the treatment that is being studied, so for example, hypnosis, and the other group receives what's called a control. And that might be nothing at all, or it might be whatever a standard treatment is. The control is basically, like the word implies, to show what the effect of hypnosis is going to be, if there is an effect. We're trying to control as many variables as possible. So we want the demographics of the people, so their ages, their conditions, to be as similar as possible between the 2 groups. And we really ideally only want the difference between those 2 groups to be the treatment that they're receiving. So one group is receiving hypnosis and one group is not. And if we can control the differences between the groups as much as possible, then that helps us when we see differences in the results between those 2 groups to say, well, since we controlled for a lot of variables, these differences can be attributed to the difference in the treatment, so hypnosis in that case.
Fantastic. So in addition to understanding what type of study it was, and I was just thinking as you were sharing that maybe in the future we'll even be able to have the folks who conducted the studies join us and say, in the future, we're going to go pretty much study by study and just have a shorter chat about it. This is the introductory session, so we wanted to make sure everyone understands all the methods that were used to even compile the document. But in the future, I'd love for us to even do, 15, 20-minute reviews of each study, and maybe the researchers and scientists will come on the call with us. So in addition to understanding how it was conducted, what went into it, the results, what is p-value and why is that important? And why was that one of the criterion you used to narrow down these various studies?
So that's a wonderful thing to bring up, p-value and statistical significance, because as you're reading through, you're going to be seeing that pop up a lot throughout the studies. And a lot of the times it's even bolded and it's associated with a number. So what do those numbers mean? So when it comes to research, let's look at these controlled trials, for example. We have 2 groups. They were all under the same conditions, except the difference is one received hypnosis and one did not, or received a standard treatment. And then what was measured was some sort of outcome that's being studied. So that might be pain level, that might be deepness of sleep. Whatever is being measured, there is a difference between the 2 groups. So when you have differences between these groups, how do we know if those differences are because of the treatment difference, or if those differences just happened due to random chance? This p-value is what helps us make that decision. Usually the standard in research is a p-value of less than 0.05, and that helps us determine if the research is statistically significant. So if we believe the difference between the 2 groups is because of their difference in treatment and not due to random chance.
Wonderful. So when we take those 16,000 studies dating back to 1896 and we want to get the top 50, we can start by just narrowing the search years. So we've got things that are more recent, and also just taking a quick glance at the p-value, because if it's not statistically significant, then it's really not worth delving into, because it could just be random chance that these findings occurred. And then beyond that, we're looking at, was this the gold standard randomized control trial? And if not, what was it? Is it still valid? And then just thinking about, okay, great. Well, now that we have these findings, how does that inform future studies where they could be even better? I know some of the feedback from our board on some of the studies was just, this is great, but the population was really small. And so a lot of times it's just a matter of having a bigger sample size. And I think as hypnotherapy steps further and further into the mainstream, and because it's becoming standard protocol to be included in programs at the Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic and Harvard Medical School doing research there at Stanford, that there will be more funding and there will be an opportunity for these studies to become even more robust in the future.
And I think it's a good thing to bring up that types of research are important, but it's also important to look at different types of research. The randomized controlled trial is a gold standard, but other types of research are also valid and also important for coming up with new observations. So there can be types of literature reviews, which this document could be considered a literature review of some type, which is compiling the findings of multiple studies within a similar field. A meta-analysis, which goes one step further to combining the data across multiple studies and doing its own sort of analysis there. So that can be helpful in getting a larger sample size, like you said. And even case studies. So Grace, you mentioned your company actually has a lot of case studies. A case study is describing the experience of one person, but that is also a valid form of research. There's a lot of case studies that are published. There are journals that are specifically dedicated to case studies. And case studies also can be quite useful, especially in fields of research that are underrepresented. So I come from a background of researching rare genetic disorders. And as rare disorders, there physically are not many people affected by them to be able to combine their data to be able to study. So for them, case studies, just the experience of even one person is very valuable.
We've got thousands and thousands and thousands of incredible stories, but also I do think our company at some point would be interested in conducting our own studies. So we will reach out to all of the folks who conducted the research that made it into this document and see if any of them want to join Dr. Pinar and I in future episodes to discuss their various studies. So we will spend the rest of today going through three of our favorites in this study from three very different disciplines. And then in future episodes, we'll take one or two and do a high-level overview of them as well, because I really think it's important that not only the time and effort that our team put into compiling this amazing research document, but that everybody can really, truly understand the depth of how this research can apply to your own life and help you rewrite your story. You know, it's not always easy to be in a field that's as widely misunderstood and as misrepresented by the media as hypnotherapy has been forever. And one of the things that keeps us going as a company is just we feel so vehemently that people deserve to know the truth. They deserve to know that there are certain things that they're continuing to experience day in and day out or suffer with or struggle with that they don't have to, and that hypnotherapy is a drug-free, non-invasive way to change your life. And one of the things that we're going to look at today is how it can be used in different ways, right? It can be one-on-one with a hypnotherapist, which is very rapid and effective, but can also be cost prohibitive. But it can also be delivered digitally, which can make it free, right? We've got a free version of our app. We've got free videos on YouTube. And so there's really a range of investments that will allow you to get these results as well. Okay, so let's dive into the very first study that we're going to be reviewing today. And this is one that a number of the members of our science review board kind of put their hands up and said, this one's really exciting. Like Dr. Ryan Casarella in particular was like, we need to know more about this one. Additional follow-ups would be fantastic. Dr. Pinar, this is the one you chose for us to start with today as well. So tell us about it.
So this is a very recent study from 2023. So it would be interesting to get in touch with this author team to see what else they might have in the works or any new research they may have published. But essentially, let's just go into that title there. Hypnosis is an effective alternative to general anesthesia. in children requiring short skin level surgery. Just paring that down, hypnosis is an effective alternative to general anesthesia. That's the finding of this study. And then specifically in children is what this study was looking at. And this was a randomized controlled trial and looking at 60 children. So as a sample size, that's pretty good. Their ages were from 7 to 16 years old. And they went through what's called skin level surgery. So this might be something like a few stitches or removing a mole, but things that usually would be given general anesthesia for. So in this study, of course, with the consent of the children and their parents, one group of the children received general anesthesia as per usual for these surgeries, and the other group did not. They received only hypnosis. So this is a study where hypnosis is being looked at as a standalone treatment. So hypnosis on its own versus general anesthesia. And looking at the results and hypnosis for, fewer children had reported high levels of anxiety near time of surgery that were receiving hypnosis. So more children that were receiving general anesthesia had more anxiety about the surgery coming up. And this was a statistically significant difference. So just knowing that the surgery is coming up, the children who were going to be receiving hypnosis were having less anxiety about it than the children who were going to be receiving general anesthesia. And then looking at the pain scores, so the pain of the surgery itself, the pain scores did not differ between the groups. So that's showing that this hypnosis was actually as effective as general anesthesia in numbing the pain of skin surgery. So we've looked at before the surgery, the pain after the surgery, and now the hospital stay. So the length of hospital stay for the group that received hypnosis was, the median was 2 hours. So that meant 50% of the children had a stay of under 2 hours versus the anesthesia group was 4 hours. So 50% of them had a hospital stay of at least 4 hours. So even their hospital stay was shortened. And this is a really strong finding to show that hypnosis is effective in a surgery setting and in children. And if you look at the journal that this research was published in, you might be thinking, well, is this published in a hypnotherapy journal? Is it published? Where is it? It's published in the British Journal of Anesthesia. So the journal itself is anesthesia focused. And this was their findings. So I thought that was just incredible.
Wow. What's so interesting is through all the years of being a hypnotherapist, so often I'll get a response of, oh, what is that? Does that even work? Or, people will kind of make jokes about it. But one demographic that does not joke about it, and even if they are very analytical or skeptical, still experience hypnotherapy, were moms preparing for birth. Because I think so many moms to be are really nervous and anxious about the experience, and they've heard about hypnobirthing, and they're willing to try literally anything to decrease the pain and to decrease the fear. And so they'll use it for hypnobirthing and then never think to themselves, oh, if it helped me with that, maybe it would help me with something else. But I think of that because moms will do anything for their children. And so I love that we're starting to help them feel better, to help them be less scared, to help them feel less pain, to help them recover more quickly. And this one study is showing it did all of those things. So the youngest children in the group were 7 years old. Someone that age being nervous and then being able to alleviate any of that concern is already enough to just, okay, we have nothing to lose. Let's try the modality, right? But then it says here, and they went from ages 7 to 16. And I'll talk a little bit about why 7 was an important age for it to be the youngest in a moment. And they do mention that in the study. So removing moles, skin tumors, ear repositioning. Ear repositioning sounds really significant. Removing of internal screws or pins and scar recovery. So that's incredible. Not only decreasing their anxiety, but zero pain difference. Not like, well, at least we decreased the anxiety, but it was a little more painful than the general anesthesia. No, exactly the same level of pain for both is astounding. And I actually didn't make the connection when I was talking about the low anesthesia supplies in World War I. That was heavily documented, where they used hypnotherapy for amputations and surgeries. But this harkens back to that era too. And a lot of folks have complications of general anesthesia or allergic reactions, and it's not safe for them to use it. So this is really exciting. And then obviously, anytime we can decrease a hospital stay, not only financially in terms of stress, but just the other things that we can pick up while we're there. I think this is just so exciting, and I can see why you and the other folks on our Science and Medical Review Board really flagged this one as being exciting. So they do say here that the minimum age of 7 was chosen according to the stage of childhood cognitive development that allows for hypnotic suggestibility. And what we know is that the brain under the age of 7 is primarily producing theta brain waves. And that's the brainwave state we go into in order to experience hypnotherapy. So under the age of 7, we really are just little sponges absorbing everything. Those new neural pathways are being made so very rapidly. We're highly suggestible. We're little parrots. We can hear something in the morning and we're saying it as part of our regular vernacular by the afternoon. We're also, highly suggestible under that age. And so many, many, many times when an adult comes to work on something in hypnotherapy and we go back to the source of where it began, they're 5 years old. They're under that threshold of 7 years old because it's where their beliefs about themselves and their world were formed. So I think it's interesting. We'll talk about this in a later study a little bit. They use the term hypnotic suggestibility. I probably would think it's a little bit more reflective of just the brainwave state that's predominantly being experienced by a person 7 or older. But anyway, I find that interesting because we have told people forever that under the age of 7, you're basically in a constant state of hypnotherapy. And then from 7 and above, this kind of conscious wall comes in, and you've got to do a little bit more to get into that theta brainwave state. You can still obviously make tremendous amounts of changes, but if you can help your child develop their growth mindset and overcome trauma and things like that, when that window is right open at 7 or under, it's pretty immediate and permanent, and you don't have to do real hypnotherapy. You can just kind of say, imagine the little prince or imagine the little princess is battling the math dragon and they are victorious and now they're the world's greatest math student. And it's like, that's the hypnotherapy. They didn't even have to close their eyes, So I think this is very exciting. Any comments on how future studies could replicate this, make it even better, even stronger, or look into more ways that we can help kiddos with pain reduction?
So I think this is actually, I would be really interested in seeing research that has referenced this study. So newer research that has come out that has built upon this study, because they did have a sample size of 60, and this was used for skin level surgery. I would like to see, and this was all used in a specific hospital unit. So to see this being used across other hospitals, and if it is being used within those other hospitals, if that research can also be collected and presented as well. Because I think to also take into mind is the people undergoing these surgeries, the children and their parents also consented to being used in this research study. So how would that differ from somebody who wasn't taking part of a research study and just undergoing the surgery? Well, I still think their hospital stay would be measured, their pain levels would be measured. I'm not sure if their level of anxiety would be measured, if they'd be asked that, but not necessarily measured, but they'd still probably be asked about, how are you feeling? So these things may or may not already be measured, but it's something that, because this is a study, is going to be collected so that we can see the results. So sort of seeing this study replicated in other hospitals, just to get more data, more findings, or even not necessarily to have that be presented as research, for this to be a technique that can be then offered, so that when parents and children are coming in for a skin level surgery, they're presented as an option. We can provide general anesthesia, or we can provide hypnosis. And this is something I'd like to ask Grace as a sort of resource to be able to provide hypnotherapy. You need to have someone who has that skill to be able to provide it, who's then on staff within the hospital. So that is something that may not be everywhere. So that is something that this hospital was able to provide. But this is basically showing that it is an effective alternative to anesthesia, so that this can be provided as an option across other hospitals.
Absolutely. And as an area of specialization when you do study hypnotherapy. So in my certification school, we've always had folks watch a BBC documentary. I think it's still available on my YouTube page. If so, we'll link it in the show notes. It's an older documentary, but it shows a woman having root canal surgery with zero anesthesia because I believe she was allergic. And they did have a hypnotherapist there the whole time in the room as it was going on. And she was able to write on a pad of paper her pain level, 0 to 10. And I believe it's been a couple years since I've watched it now, but I believe the highest she ever got was a 3. It might actually only be a 2. And so that really, on the pain scale, that's only like a pressure, not even a pain yet. And because the number never got so high that they needed to stop or pause or figure out something else, they were able to complete the root canal and have it be very, very successful. So if anyone's interested in using hypnotherapy for pain reduction, I recommend seeking out that BBC documentary. And in terms of wide scale application of this process, I do think for major surgeries, having a hypnotherapist in the room is important because things can change and it's extremely serious. You have to make sure that this person stays comfortable the whole time. However, as far as preparing and keeping anxiety down for post-operative recovery to keep pain levels down, and probably even limiting hospital stay, digital hypnotherapy via our app absolutely could make a positive difference. And that is very easy for a nurse to be able to come in with, an iPad with music on it and say, okay, you're going to listen to the pain reduction hypnosis. And it can even be age dependent. So, a recording that would be really effective for a 7-year-old is different than it would sound like for a 16-year-old. For the 7-year-old, it might focus on a lot of magic fairy dust, making you feel safe and comfortable. And for the 16-year-old, it might just be about, there's grit and resilience inside of you, and you're braver than you've ever known. And it can also be personality dependent, but that's what's so nice about recordings is you can make 10 of them very easily and then get the one that's closest to what that patient would benefit from and just play it on a loop. And for anybody who works in a hospital who's listening, I mean, the app, or just, again, free recordings on YouTube, just to see, again, anecdotally, if it helps your patients decrease their pre-anxiety, their post-operative pain, that's already enough to really change the patient's experience and to help them get better faster. So very exciting. Okay, well, we are going to move on to another topic that might sound totally and completely different, but there are actually some mechanisms that are shared between the two. But that's what's kind of always been a blessing and a curse, if I want to be dramatic about it, with hypnotherapy, is that it helps with so much that it ends up people kind of, I know some people interpret that as it sounding like snake oil. Like, how can the same thing help with children who are having screws or pins removed and also help you overcome fear of public speaking or fear of flying or cure insomnia? Like, how can one thing do it all? But that's why having this research compiled in one place is so important to say, because it's not about being an expert in, ear repositioning. It's about being an expert in helping someone access the theta brainwave state, which is where you feel totally perfectly safe and relaxed, where we leave the fight, flight, freeze, survival mode, where we experience anxiety and hypervigilance and fear, and getting into a state that is rest and digest, and then visualizing what we want instead of what we don't want. And then the brain does the rest and creates new neural pathways rapidly to support what you want. So we are experts in the process. And then the specifics of what we're working on are really kind of worked out within the mind of the client. It's fascinating. Okay, so the next one we're going to move to is page 23. And we are going to discuss hypnotherapy and IBS.
So we actually have two studies that are both about gut health, IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, and about the way in which the hypnotherapy is delivered, so through digital and online methods. So starting off with this one by Noble et al., 2022, it showed that online gut-directed hypnotherapy reduces IBS symptoms, and it is highly recommended by the participants. So that's something that you get straight from the participants, that they had a positive experience and that they are recommending this form of therapy to others. And that's what those two stats are right there, circled at the top of the page, that 90% of them are recommending this online form of hypnotherapy, and that over 90% of them, 92% of them, had an improvement in their overall IBS symptoms. So I can see why, with having so much improvement in symptoms, that most people would be recommending it. And to look into why this was performed remotely, the hypnotherapy, it really is something that the COVID-19 pandemic showed us. Can we also perform hypnotherapy online? And that's what was tested here. Specifically, they used Skype sessions. So that is one-to-one, like having a hypnotherapy session with the hypnotherapist and the patient. And they used the Manchester protocol. So all these studies have a methods section, which is how the research was performed, so that in theory, if somebody else wanted to perform the same research, if they wanted to replicate your study, your methodology, your instructions should be enough for them to do that. And let's say if it's a drug study, they give you the name of the drug and the exact dosage. They might not say how that drug is working, but there are places where you can look up, how is this drug working within the body? So I think it's equally important that the hypnosis, how it's delivered, what is being delivered, is also described in detail for people who want to replicate that study. But so that was useful that they do give the protocol there, and they're saying that these are sort of one-on-one hypnotherapy sessions. And just to point out, so since our last study was a randomized controlled trial, this one is not. This is looking at one group of people, 52 people here specifically. We're looking at this group, and they are all receiving the hypnotherapy. But if you look at the tags, you'll see it's noted as pre-post intervention. So that's another kind of study where this group is surveyed or studied before they receive the treatment, and after they received the treatment. And then the same people's reports are compared. So that was what was done for these 52 people. And looking at these results, I'm going to say a little bit, were forced to have this remote hypnotherapy because this study took place during the pandemic. But I think it's really nice that they included this question in their survey. They were asked, well, would you have opted to take this online hypnotherapy over face-to-face whether or not we had the pandemic? And 52% said they would have. So that's interesting to keep in mind, that half of this group would have looked for online hypnotherapy anyway, but half of them would have preferred a more traditional in-person, face-to-face method if they hadn't been in this situation of the pandemic. It is interesting because it's like some of them wouldn't have chosen it. And then another thing that all the participants were surveyed on was how they rated the platform of how they received the hypnotherapy, and they gave that a 4.5 out of 5 rating for being easy to use. So they found this online form of hypnotherapy to be easy to use, accessible. And now into the really meat of the paper, how did they feel about that treatment? So here's when we come to the post-intervention. After the treatment, 92% of the participants had an improvement in their overall IBS symptoms. So most of those participants are improving in their IBS symptoms. Now you might be asking, okay, how much of an improvement? So specifically, 46% of them had at least a 30% reduction in pain. And then, because of this pretty strong results, you can see that most of the participants, 90% of them, would recommend remote gut-directed hypnotherapy to others. So that's recommending both hypnotherapy and the way that it's being delivered. This is showing hypnotherapy's effect in IBS patients. And what's interesting about this study is it can be used as a basis to look at hypnotherapy used across other conditions. It's both interesting from an IBS efficacy perspective and from a digital hypnosis perspective.
Amazing. I really didn't understand just how emotionally destructive IBS is as well, into all of the physical challenges that come along with this, until I had a student come to a live training here in Florida when we used to do all of our hypnotherapy certification in person. And whenever I took a group vote, I would have everybody close their eyes and raise their hands because I just didn't want peer pressure to weigh in. So something as simple as, where are we going to eat lunch? Everybody close your eyes. I'll give you 3 options and you can vote. And so there was one day where it was beautiful out, wasn't too hot. And I said, okay, let's see if we want to go have class for an hour on the beach. It's a 10-minute walk from here. And close your eyes and raise your hands if you want to go, raise your hands if you don't want to go. And 2 people said they didn't want to go. And I wasn't really thinking about it. I was like, majority rules, let's go to the beach. And that night afterwards, one of the students hung back and said, Grace, I just wanted to share with you why I chose I didn't want to go to the beach. She said, I had IBS and I have IBS and I didn't know if there would be a bathroom there. And I became extremely anxious that if something were to happen, I wouldn't be able to find a bathroom in time. And so I got nothing out of that class because I was so anxious and so scared the whole time that I would be embarrassed in front of my classmates. So it's not just the physical toll, it's the emotional toll of the fear of constantly needing to know that you're going to be in a place where if the symptoms arise, that there's a restroom. And that cognitive toll is exhausting. So when I look at this, I don't just see that 92.3% of people said I had an improvement, which I look at this and I'm like, that's almost everybody. That's amazing. And as you pointed out, because this was during the pandemic, it had to be online. But 48% of people said they would have preferred it being in person. So even though they would have preferred it being in person, they had it online, but still 92.3% had an improvement, even though it wasn't through the modality that would have been their first choice. So that's like really, really exciting. So I don't just see the pain reduction or, less symptoms. I see the cognitive mental load being lifted and the fear being lifted. And that's one of the reasons this is so exciting. So before we compare this to the next study on IBS and hypnotherapy, I just wanted to point out this online versus in person. So we started providing sessions as a company only online years and years and years before the pandemic. So my first ever real office as a hypnotherapist was in Union Square in New York City, which is a very busy, bustling section of the city. And every day, all my clients all day long would show up late by 5 or 10 minutes because everything's crowded or the trains are late or their meeting ran over, and they're frazzled and they're intense type A New Yorkers who, want to fix this problem, but they don't know how to meditate and this isn't going to work for me anyway. And so now I love, and I've always loved when people will say, I don't know if hypnotherapy could work for me. I'm so type A, I'm so high strung. And I'm like, that's my bread and butter. Those are the first people I ever helped. And every single one of them was high strung. And hypnotherapy is so effective because that hypervigilant, intense, always on, always going, always running brain is the brain that so desperately wants and benefits from the theta brainwave state. It's like someone who's so dehydrated, finally getting a sip of cool, clean water, So hypnotherapy is fantastic for people who are type A and high strung. Anyway, so they show up late. They have to get out of this stress state into the theta brainwave state. Now they're finally feeling safe. They're finally feeling relaxed. And then the session's over, and then they've got to get up and go back out into the city and get back to work. And so the theta brainwave state is over. Like, it's done. They're in Manhattan now. And then every once in a while, Zoom wasn't a thing yet. It was all Skype. Folks would say, oh, I've got to go to Hong Kong for 3 weeks. I don't want to miss my sessions. Can we try them over Skype? Or someone would say, I've got a cold. It's not a super bad cold, but I don't want to come in. Can we have it over Skype? And what I found was people arrived on time. They were already relaxed because they're in their house. They're in their PJs. They just ate dinner. They go into hypnosis. They're in the theta brainwave state. They're relaxed and they're feeling safe. And then I could count them down deeper at the end. And if they didn't have anything else to do, and we got better and better at educating people not to book anything immediately after, they could go to bed. They could go take a bubble bath. They could journal. They could walk around the block. And so the length of time that they were in that theta state was elongated, which improved their outcomes. And so when we realized that, we were like, if online hypnotherapy improves outcomes, why are we paying New York City rent? It was really that simple because it was early on and we were completely broke and we wanted to help as many people as possible. We also said this also makes this scalable. Now we can help more people who aren't just in the city. And it means we can help them whenever they travel, wherever they go. And so there's still every once in a while folks in town, where I live in Vero Beach, who have been watching our journey because they know Bernardo and I. And they'll say, oh, I really want to do hypnotherapy. I just wish it was in person. I'm more comfortable with in person. But as we can see from this study, even if you have a preference of in person, you can still get wildly incredible results that are positive. But also, I think once people hear, it's actually more effective from the comfort of your own home where you can close your eyes, have headphones on, and be in your safe place, not somebody's office. We have a beautiful office here in town, but every once in a while, our neighbor upstairs decides to drill into their cabinets. And they don't warn us every time they're going to start doing that or move a piece of furniture. So when you've got those headphones on and you're at home in your safe place, not to mention you can stay in theta longer, it actually just magnifies your investment and allows you to get even more out of it. So I love seeing that. Okay, so before we move on to the next IBS study, which we'll just look at briefly, any recommendations on how this one could be replicated or done even better?
So a way to maybe improve this study or build upon this study, that might be a better way to put it, is the type of study it was. So I mentioned this is a pre-post intervention. It's the same group of people that are being followed before and after. This could also be a subject of study for a randomized controlled trial where maybe, again, everybody is receiving the same hypnotherapy, but they're receiving it in person versus digitally. So then that can really help narrow down to see if there is a difference in effect by how the hypnotherapy is delivered. And then specifically, because they did mention Manchester protocol there, and they did say gut-directed hypnotherapy, maybe comparing different protocols or comparing gut-directed hypnotherapy versus a different type of hypnotherapy to see if that efficacy is really coming from it being gut-directed, so specified for IBS symptoms maybe.
Great. Okay, so we have one example of one-on-one live hypnotherapy sessions via Skype, which again are fantastic, clearly yield really powerful results. But ultimately, one-on-one private hypnotherapy can become cost prohibitive very quickly for many folks. And that's where the digital hypnotherapy becomes even more exciting. And that is what our next study on the very next page is about.
Yeah, so actually, I think it's really nice to be able to have both these types of studies looking in the same area, so people with IBS, but a slightly different method in how the hypnotherapy is delivered. So this one is also digital, but it's through an app. And this one actually is a randomized controlled trial. So they had a very large sample size here, 362 people with IBS. And they were split into groups who either received something called regulora. Let me say that again. So they were split into two groups, with one group receiving Regulora, which is an FDA-cleared prescription app for gut-directed hypnotherapy. And then the second group used a muscle relaxation app. So that's the control group. And it's really important when choosing a control that you pick something that is as close to the treatment as possible in terms of modality. So it's good that both of these groups used apps. And it's good that both of them, it's good that the control group had a relaxation app. So the question we're asking here, is there any difference in hypnotherapy versus any sort of relaxation app that's being used? Actually, specifically here, a muscle relaxation app. So by comparing those two head to head, we're able to see if hypnotherapy itself is having an effect and not just the fact that they're using a sort of relaxation app. And this study did take place across 12 weeks. And it says from weeks 9 through 12, so near the tail end of the treatment, significantly more of the hypnotherapy group compared to the muscle relaxation group had more of a reduction in abdominal pain. So that's showing that it might be taking some time for this treatment to take effect, but through the end of the treatment, more of the people receiving hypnotherapy compared to the control group had more of a pain reduction. And that was just throughout the end phase of the treatment. When looking throughout the whole 12 weeks of treatment, even there, significantly more of the group receiving hypnotherapy had pain reduction compared to the muscle relaxation group. So looking at those amounts throughout the treatment as a whole, 29% of the hypnotherapy group had at least a 30% reduction in pain versus 18.8% of the muscle relaxation group had that amount of pain. And then looking at the sort of end of the treatment, the numbers went up a little bit more even then. So that is showing that there is a statistically significant difference, that hypnotherapy specifically is having this effect in reducing pain. And it's not just that everybody receiving muscle relaxation is having that same reduction in pain. And then just to look at sort of side effects, that's also important to take into mind. No participants experienced serious adverse effects that meant that the study needed to be discontinued, that were rated as serious. So that's always important to note, that along with the benefits of treatment, we have to look at potential harms or potential side effects. So that's important to see that in this study, nobody had any serious side effects there.
Wow. I love that this shows that the real transformation took place deeper into the study. Something we say all the time is, hypnotherapy isn't magic. It's a process of conditioning, and you really are creating these new neural pathways to have a different experience. And it can take some time to retrain the brain and the body to have a different experience. So the fact that a lot of the really positive results happened after the 9-week mark show that, yes, this is incredibly powerful, and you've got to be committed to that level of conditioning. And if you are recommended a 12-week program and you listen to it for a week and you go to evaluate it then and say, oh, quote unquote, it didn't work for me. I always think it's so interesting. Nobody would think that they could go to the gym once and do a couple sit-ups and have a 6-pack, but because hypnotherapy does make you feel so good so quickly, and because there are the outlier experiences where folks do quit smoking after one session, or their fear of flying is reduced by 90% after 2 sessions, that they're not always thinking you've got to commit to this for a number of weeks. But this study shows that the real quote unquote magic happened once you passed 9 weeks. Also, we get the question a lot, well, what's the difference between, folks understand the difference more or less around one-on-one hypnotherapy and meditation, but they don't always understand the difference between our hypnotherapy app versus a meditation app like Headspace or Calm. And I think this study helps to illuminate some of those differences, that a guided app muscle relaxation can make you feel a lot better. And yet this study shows that nearly double the people who use the hypnotherapy app reduce their pain by 30% or more than just the muscle relaxation app. Even though the muscle relaxation app is still great, nearly double the people had those fantastic results with hypnotherapy. And there's just something to be said for folks who are trained to speak to the subconscious mind, trained to make sure that you are accessing that theta brainwave state, and that you're not just relaxing a little bit, but that you really truly are getting out of that fight, flight, freeze survival mode into the parasympathetic rest and digest, where this lasting transformation can take place. The fact that no serious adverse events were considered serious or caused study discontinuation, if we think about what's typically prescribed to help someone with IBS, the type of medication and the potential side effects of drugs that we are prescribed for any ailment that we see in this study can be improved with hypnotherapy, that we're putting less stress and strain on our body with the side effects of these potential medications. And I'm not saying, listen to your doctor. If your doctor's prescribing you something, obviously take your doctor's advice. But how wonderful is it to see that so many things in this research document are typically dealt with by saying, put this pill in your body. And yes, there are a ton of potential negative side effects. It's not going to actually fix the root of the issue. It'll just make you feel a tiny bit better and cover up some of the symptoms. Or you don't take any drugs. In this instance, you listen to something and your pain goes away. And also at the bottom here, it also says improvement in abdominal pain and stool symptoms. So a lot of physiological improvement across the board. And again, neither study is mentioning it, but I'm just thinking about that one student who, I just sort of carelessly was like, let's all go to the beach, and not stop to think for a second, well, why would two people not want to go to the beach on a beautiful day? And ask a little bit more, pull someone aside and try to understand how scary it is to have this and be in a place where you can't get to a restroom or a bathroom, and the alleviation of that stress and that fear. So very exciting. Now, this Regulora is a prescribed mobile app. So it is prescribed to patients by their physicians, which means that you can't just get it. And we do have an IBS program on our Grace Hypnotherapy app. So if you or a loved one have been diagnosed with IBS, or honestly any gut-related issues, it's worth just listening to it and seeing if after a couple of weeks your symptoms have improved, because based on the findings from these two studies, it seems highly probable that they might. All right. And the final study we're going to deep dive into today is about sleep.
So this study on sleep is another randomized controlled trial, and they were looking at 39 healthy elderly women, and they were split into actually 4 groups, but I'll break down how they were split a little bit. So first, they were split into groups based on having what was measured as high or low hypnotic suggestibility. And for the groups which were in high or low hypnotic suggestibility, within them, they were split again into receiving either to listen to an audio recording of hypnotic suggestions while going to sleep, or a placebo audio recording. And specifically, this one was someone narrating a Wikipedia article. So we do have 4 groups. So just to go over them, the group that has high hypnotic suggestibility, listening to hypnotic suggestion recording, high hypnotic suggestibility, listening to a Wikipedia article, and then low hypnotic suggestibility, listening to a hypnosis recording or a Wikipedia article. So our 4 groups there. And what this study found was specifically the group that had high suggestibility, that listened to the hypnotic suggestion recording. They had a statistically significant 57% increase in their slow wave sleep compared to the control group. So that's specifically within the group that was measured as highly suggestible. Then the group that was having low suggestibility, they didn't have a significant difference between their slow wave sleep amongst the people who listened to the hypnotic recording versus the Wikipedia article recording. So that's basically showing for those who were measured to have the high hypnotic suggestibility, the hypnotic suggestion recordings were significantly increasing their slow wave sleep, so by over 50%. Now, other than just the effect on slow wave sleep, everybody was also measured in how they were able to complete a cognitive function task after they woke up. And the group that had hypnosis and the group that was highly suggestible who received hypnosis had improved scores compared to the group who was low suggestibility. So as a result, that's showing that hypnosis is an effective technique to improving both slow wave sleep and cognitive ability in this group of elderly adults.
Well, I love this finding not only for sleep, but also for the onset potentially of dementia. Because if it's showing an improvement in cognition, that lends itself to greater questions of how this can be applied to folks who are experiencing memory loss. So I would love to see more work done on that too, because we know being in a relaxed, safe state physiologically allows for better recall and improved memory. So I would love to see more of that, especially because this study was with elderly women. Now, I do have a little bit of a probably controversial thing to say about it, but I actually don't believe that this high suggestibility, low suggestibility thing exists. In my experience with the tens of thousands of sessions that I personally and our company have completed, if high suggestibility and low suggestibility were a thing, we would see it all the time. We would see evidence of it weekly. We would see evidence of it daily because our team does so many sessions. We would say, okay, yes, we would love to help you with XYZ. Let's get into the session. Oh, you're not seeing any results. It must be because you're not very suggestible. Or let's do this test first to see if you're suggestible or not. And then that will help us know how many sessions you need. But what we find again and again and again and again, that does not even actually exist. It's everybody goes in and out of the theta brainwave state multiple times per day, especially when you're falling asleep. You go from theta into delta, delta is sleep. And when you're emerging from sleep, you're leaving delta, exiting out through theta, going up through alpha and into beta, which is your normal waking state of consciousness. So what they're, I think, attempting to say is that there are people who can't go into the theta brainwave state, which is untrue. So what I think we're seeing more of here is it doesn't say this is a randomized controlled trial study with 39 healthy elderly women who were desperate to overcome crippling insomnia. Because what we have found through the years is your level of desire to see the result of what you're working on is the indication of how well the hypnotherapy will work, and can a lot of times also indicate how many sessions you will need. So for example, if someone came to me and they said, I'm pre-diabetic, I'm terrified of what's going to happen to me physically. They're calling Alzheimer's diabetes 3. I'm terrified of what's going to happen to me mentally. I'm terrified I won't be here to see my grandchildren graduate from high school or college because this disease could progress. I have to quit eating sugar. This person, whether they owned a bakery or not, doesn't matter how much sugar is a part of their life, hypnotherapy will help this person quit sugar. And it might take them 3 sessions or it might take them 10 sessions. But in our experience, that person is going to either drastically reduce their sugar intake or stop altogether. Now, if someone came to me and they said, it'd be really nice. I've got 5 extra pounds on me. I'm tired of these love handles. It'd be nice to stop eating sugar. And I say to them, okay, on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being you want it more than anything on planet Earth, what number are you? And they're like, a 4. Hypnotherapy is not going to be effective. Come back when your level of desirability is 7 or above. So I think what a lot of these studies, especially the older ones, this one's only from 2015, so not that old, but especially the ones back in the day where suggestibility was like their crux of everything. Did you ask them how badly they want the results? Did you ask them, is insomnia destroying your life? Or did you just find 39 healthy elderly women who were willing to participate in a study, and you are miscategorizing them into quote unquote low suggestibility, but actually they just have low desirability? But if you had asked them, these same people, if they have arthritis, how badly would you like to decrease your pain, and put them in that study, you might find that they're in the quote unquote high suggestibility group only because actually their desirability is high. So again, whenever I see a study where they're basing things off of low suggestibility or high suggestibility, I don't think that's a real thing. And I don't think it ever has been. It's a matter of how badly do you want the result, and have you had the amount of sessions you need. As we saw in that last IBS study, they didn't start to see the real results until after 9 weeks. And because the movies portray this as magic, and because a lot of hypnotherapists say, I can cure you in 1 session, people think there's something wrong with them or this doesn't work for them. And they give up before they get to the point where they're going to see the actual tangible lasting results. So I would love to see studies about that, about desirability versus quote unquote suggestibility. Now, do I think that it's possible that there are outlier situations where perhaps there is a traumatic brain injury that would decrease someone's ability to get into or stay in the theta brainwave state where those new neural pathways are created rapidly, where you could have high desirability but still not see the same results? Perhaps, but that would be such a small percentage of the population. And again, if this were truly a consideration, we would see it every single day at our company. The only time we see folks, and we've got 5-star reviews out of 30,000 sessions. That would not be the case if 1 in every, 10 people were quote unquote not suggestible. Yeah. So the only time we see folks say, you know what, I'm sorry, this isn't really working for me, is people who had their sessions purchased for them as a gift. It happens so rarely, it almost never happens. But if it ever happens, it's someone who's like, yeah, my wife got me these sessions for Christmas. She wants me to stop smoking. I don't want to stop smoking. And so we've gotten very good at a team at saying, please don't buy hypnotherapy sessions for anyone where you are attempting to designate what they will work on. Because if they don't want the result, they're not getting the result. It's not mind control. They have to want it. So anyway, I love the findings in this study. I love that it's showing that folks are getting better sleep. Again, they're not taking any drugs in order to have this improvement. That's very exciting. I love that we're seeing an improvement in cognition, and that, this could open the door for more research around improving memory and recall and potentially slowing dementia. Who knows? But the whole low-high hypnotic suggestibility thing, I'm not a proponent of it, and I'd love to see some studies just on that.
And I think that's a great point to build on further research specifically for this study. We're looking at the sample size of 39. So that's split into 2 and then split into 2 again. So those groups that are being compared are then approximately 10 people each. So those are pretty small groups that are being compared. Still, statistically, they were able to analyze these results, but it would be interesting to see this replicated. I really did like their methodology of having as a placebo a Wikipedia article, because it's supposed to be just boring, something that is not supposed to really stimulate your thought, just hearing somebody's voice constantly talking in maybe a consistent tone versus the hypnotic suggestion recording. And then also this was performed in specifically elderly women. They said they didn't want gender to be a confounding variable there, so they didn't want gender to maybe have an effect, so they specifically did women there. But something I did notice throughout these studies is if they do include men and women, of course they mention their demographics, but a lot of the studies were done more so in women, or there were fewer studies where only men were sort of the topic of interest, which is a little bit of a flip from what we see in a lot of scientific research where men are primarily studied more, and you can't necessarily say that, well, if this was the effect in men, that should represent what we expect for the entire population. But this document does have a couple studies where hypnosis's effect in men was studied, but that is something that's a little bit rarer that I found across the research.
Interesting. And that is a good point, that what we're comparing this to is a Wikipedia article being narrated in a neutral tone. And so what we're being shown here is it's not just a matter of listening to someone drone on in a neutral tone, which is what hypnotherapy can sometimes sound like. The content actually matters. Mm-hmm. And the words that are being said are directly linked to the outcomes. So I think that's great. Well, in this research doc, we have quite a few studies on sleep, in case you'd like to go to the show notes, download the document, and look through them. So we've got one, self-hypnosis in person and by phone improves sleep quality in postmenopausal women. got the one we just looked at together. Self-hypnosis improves sleep quality and insomnia symptoms in college students. Men with prostate cancer are interested in trying hypnosis to treat their severe insomnia. And we will probably go over a few more of those in future episodes. Well, I'm thrilled that we were able to introduce everyone here today to our research document. It truly was a labor of love getting it created, and that we were able to deep dive into the first 3 studies here today. So we're just going to talk for a few minutes now about the implications of this growing body of research, what it means for practitioners, both hypnotherapists and adjacent practitioners who can already see how much this could benefit their patients and their clients, what it means for patients, and what it means in general for the field of hypnotherapy. So any thoughts, Pinar?
Well, something that really stood out to me as I was compiling this research was who is performing the research. And that can be a study all on its own. There's a field of study called bibliometrics. So you actually look into who is performing studies, the institutions they're from, the countries they're from, how often their studies are then referenced by other studies. So research upon research, actually. So something that came across when I was looking through is the journals that these articles are from. And there are hypnotherapy specific journals. The name of the journal might literally be Journal of Hypnotherapy and then put the field there. But then, like we saw with the anesthesia article, that was from an anesthesia journal. So to see the hypnotherapy studies that are being published in journals where hypnotherapy is not the main focus and hypnotherapy is really being studied as perhaps an alternate treatment or an alternate option to what they have as a standard for whatever that journal's field may be. So that was something that I think is interesting. It's great to have both hypnotherapy specific journals and have these articles that are also published in non-hypnotherapy specific journals, because it increases the readership and it gets hypnotherapy out there to people who weren't necessarily looking at it. There will be lots of experts in the field who, will get the journal, read through a lot of the articles, and that is to sort of keep on top of the research. So, and because this research document is using research from the past decade or so 2010 and on, this is showing those articles that are putting up hypnotherapy as an alternative treatment, as an option, and across a wide range of fields. When you look at the table of contents, you have a lot of different fields there, and each of those categories have different studies within them. Some of them, like the IBS studies, are on the same condition, and I think that's important because there's not just one study that should represent a condition in its entirety, but for a lot of the categories we have a study on reproductive health. We have studies on women who are in the birthing process. We have studies on postmenopausal symptoms. We have studies on menstruation pain. And so that's all in the reproductive health category. So there's really so much out there. It's a broad field. And then looking at those numbers, those 16,000 studies in the database, over 3,000 of them were specifically clinical trials, meta-analyses, and then reviews. So those are specific types of studies as well. And that's showing sort of the main areas of research in hypnotherapy. It does seem to be these trials, which I think is good, of course, because it's considered the gold standard of research. But that is basically comparing a group receiving hypnotherapy versus a group not receiving hypnotherapy, or a group receiving hypnotherapy plus a standard treatment versus just the standard treatment. So in a lot of the research I saw, it was comparative research to compare hypnosis against standard therapy. Grace, what would you say? Of course, we should increase that amount of research as well, but what kind of research would you like to see, sort of other than this comparison against treatment options that we have currently?
It's such a great question. Well, I am very passionate about the pain reduction area because we know opioids and even NSAIDs and different forms of medication for pain reduction long term have such devastating impacts. You know, the risk versus the reward of a lot of prescribed pain medication is really tenuous. And there are just a number of folks I've crossed paths with in my life who were leading really fulfilling, vibrant lives. And then they unfortunately had some sort of physical accident and hurt their back and had a surgery. And now all of a sudden opioids have destroyed their lives, you know. And if hypnotherapy can be there either as a complement so that the dosage of the pain medication is lower, or perhaps can entirely replace it, I think that is so exciting. So I would love to see more on that front. I was on Dr. Oz a number of years ago discussing this hypnotherapy as an alternative to opioid use. And he's not everyone's cup of tea, so this isn't meant to be divisive or political, but if you're allowed to be on a really popular television show talking about something this exciting and cutting edge, you say yes. And at least that's how I feel. I want to get the word out. We're here to make hypnotherapy mainstream. And I want millions and millions and millions of people to understand they have the option. They have the option to try something that is drug-free, that could potentially not only help them heal faster, but potentially protect against their lives being destroyed through addiction. And there's just so many areas that I would love to see more about. I can't think of any areas where I wouldn't love to see more research, but I think out of everything that's like towards the top of the mountain, just because of how risky those meds can be long term. And I am very interested about that question versus the low suggestibility versus the desirability, because that's just something that, again, has come up my whole career, but I see that being used all the time. And I'd love for some real hard research to either educate me and help me see it from a different way and realize that I have been interpreting it incorrectly. Or I think if we can get all of the researchers and the scientists on the same page, that we're not looking at this suggestibility thing that isn't real, it will really change the platform from where the rest of the research jumps off, and we'll be asking better questions of the participants from the very beginning. So it'll be interesting to see if any of the people who conducted these studies want to be on the podcast at some point in the future. But I really appreciate you being here today. So that, because the thing is, when you go see one of those movies and you see this ridiculous scene in front of you, you don't say to yourself, oh, you know what? I wonder if this is the one thing that can finally help me with the biggest challenge I've had in my life in a drug-free way. Let me go test that out. And I think this research, when we can talk about it in a digestible way that everyone can understand, whether they're a scientist or a researcher or just a lay person who's interested, just so rapidly makes all that nonsense go away. You're just like,
nonsense. Okay, that's the perfect word for it. Yeah.
You know, like this 7-year-old child didn't feel any pain, didn't have anesthesia, their hospital stay was decreased, and their anxiety is down. That's the truth of what this is. There's no belief. There's no more like, oh, I don't believe that would work for me, or like, oh, I don't believe in that. There's no belief required. It's not a faith-based system. You just either want the result and have enough sessions, or you don't. So I'm very, very excited to help people realize how black and white this is, how powerful this is. And even though there is a spiritual component to hypnotherapy that can be so beautiful, I think it's important that all of us who are in positions like I am really spend more and more time in the science, in the research, and sharing that as far and wide as we can, so that more and more people turn to this first instead of last.
I'm actually so grateful to have been a part of this research project because I personally know the power of hypnosis. I've seen it work. I know it works. But then describing it to others, everybody always gets so surprised because there's that media depiction. So then it never even occurred to me to say, well, how can we support the efficacy of hypnosis to people who are skeptical about it? Research, like it didn't even come to my mind, and I'm a researcher. So, and then to look into this field, it was really interesting to be able to quantify that effectiveness, to see it being used across so many different categories, to see both the qualitative and quantitative data that's being recorded, because people are being measured across different scales, different pain scales, symptom scales, and then they're also giving their personal feedback where surveys collect that to say, yes, I would recommend this, or I would do this again, or I rate this methodology well. And then specifically that digital aspect too. I've been in the online education space since before the pandemic happened. And then, of course, during the pandemic, a lot of people experienced what's called emergency online education. But even in that case, a lot of people said, wow, online education works for me, or I didn't know that you could actually teach these things online, or there's so many things that can be done online that I didn't know that that was a method that worked. And to see that in the hypnotherapy space as well, that was just so, just the cherry on top to be able to say, wow, it's not just the different fields, it's also the way that it's delivered. And something that I would like to see more in research, because I'm a really detail-oriented person, I would like to see when they say the hypnotherapy was provided. Some of them do say what protocol they did, or they might even give the scripts. But sometimes they just say the participants were taught self-hypnosis, how to perform that, or the participants had sessions with hypnotherapists. And that's all the detail we're getting. And I know that that also has an effect, that, quality of the hypnosis they're receiving, what's going on there, I think that also has an effect. That wasn't really delved into in some of the research, so I would like that to be a little bit more prominent, so that if somebody read this study and was really interested by the results and they want to replicate it, that also gives them a path ahead so that they can see, what method was used and how to go about it.
I agree with you. And what's interesting is so much of the work I do with my clients who tend to be high performers, whether they're CEOs and founders, or they're on the PGA tour, or they're in the public eye and in a celebrity capacity. When we have a session, so much of what I'm saying is just honestly being intuitively guided. And that is such an interesting thing from a research perspective, because how do you get that on paper? How do you turn that into a process? And yet with our hypnotherapy school, I'm able to very effectively train folks how to be excellent hypnotherapists in a way that is very systematic. And the final piece, the cherry on top, so to speak, is that intuition. But intuition is really just your brain being honed after thousands and thousands and thousands of years of practice. Years. I can feel that way. Hours of practice. And so you can make it systematized. You can become extremely proficient. So it might be difficult to replicate a study based on, for example, my one-on-one sessions with my private clients, because they're totally unique. If there's any similarities at all, it might just be the induction, the beginning part, helping them get from beta to theta. maybe the summary in the end. There might be trends amongst moms. There might be trends amongst founders. But in general, I'm genuinely seeing images in my brain of what to say next. And a lot of times they're things I've never said before. So I love that. I'm fascinated by that. But we don't have to use that in research for the research to still be effective, because the app, our app, says the same thing in the recording every time, right? It's a recording. So thousands of people are listening to the same sleep recording, or, feel confident recording, or whatever it is, and they're still getting great results, even though there's no intuition involved other than maybe the first time I recorded it. So I think there are these two very interesting sides to hypnotherapy, but just because there is a element of it that might be hard to track, that doesn't mean that we can't have this whole huge body of work where you're just saying the same things every time, and then test it where you change 10 of the words, test it where you change another 10 of the words, until you get like the perfect script or something like that. Is absolutely doable, and I think would be fascinating. All right. Well, thank you all so much for listening. Each one of these themes we discussed here today and the studies behind them deserves a deeper dive. In future episodes, Dr. Pinar and I will take a closer look at individual studies, their findings, and what they mean for you. And then, if today sparked your curiosity, you can download the full research document at the link in the show notes. And please let us know which themes or studies you'd like us to explore first in upcoming episodes. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Pinar. This was amazing. We really appreciate your time and your expertise, and I can't wait to hear the feedback from today's episode.
Thank you, Grace. I had a fantastic time, and I just love talking about research, so give it all to me.
Perfect. We look forward to next time. Thank you.